All right, so hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's policy committee meeting of the Board of School Directors. We have 4 agenda items for today, and we're hoping that we can move through them fairly quickly with you. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm in Board Docs, and you're welcome to join me in Board Docs, or you can just look at the screen if that's easier for you. So I'm in the agenda for today's policy committee meeting, and item number 1 is just a reminder, because so many of the members of our policy committee are new to the board. These 4 policies have been moved to the board agenda for a week from Tuesday, January 18th board meeting for full first reading. So typically policies have 2 readings before they're adopted. So January 18th will be the first reading for policy 6, 8, 201, and 824, based on the review that we conducted in our December meeting. So just wanted to double check that you don't have any questions lingering about those 4 policies. So, and as a reminder, if you go into policy drafts, you'll see the language that you would be adopting and recommending to the board to adopt on all 4 of those policies. Okay. Any questions?
None for me.
Okay. So then we have the policies for second review. These are policies that we began to discuss last month, and we want to finalize those conversations and ideally bring these forward to the board for first reading on the 18th as well. So there were questions around policy 815 and 816. Specifically, Sarah, you had asked about the conflict on policy 815 with regard to advertising. And our preliminary response from our school district solicitor, Fox Rothschild, is that they do not believe that we have a conflict of interest there.
Okay.
But I'm waiting for just a final written confirmation go forward. So I wanted to ask, because we don't have another meeting prior to the 18th, if that holds up with Fox Rothschild, our solicitors. Are you comfortable with me placing 815 and 816 onto the board agenda for first reading on the 18th?
Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't a wall, it was just a question or thing to flag. And then with 816, I believe that I had raised the question about YouTube being included.
Yes.
In that, yeah.
And there wasn't YouTube apparently is fairly ubiquitous in school districts, but you'll have to refresh my memory. Was there a specific question?
Let me go back and look through my notes,
okay,
and then
yeah,
I'll
no
tell you. I
problem.
just remember that I had that flag.
Yeah, the 2 questions I had were about the conflict on the advertising, and then the other was actually related to the educational equity. I do have the note on that, but we'll get there in just a moment.
You can continue, and I'll see if I can find my original notes.
Okay. If there's a question there, we can absolutely hold, or we can work on it in the next week and then bring it forward to the board for the first reading. With a first reading, if you want to make any amendments, you can do that before the second reading.
Oh, if that's the case, let's proceed then. And then if I have anything else,
okay,
I can do it in the next round.
And if it comes up even in the next week prior to the board meeting and you want me to make an adjustment, I can do that, because we won't publish these policies in our board agenda until next Friday afternoon for the following Tuesday's meeting. Okay, and then we move on to educational equity. And I do want to open up that policy because we had some substantive discussions, I think. So I'm going to go into the actual draft, and I'll go into 832. Okay, and so I did share this with the entire school district community in December and asked for feedback. Currently, There seems to be consistency with the idea, support for the idea of the equity action plan being presented every 3 years, along with the comprehensive plan, and that we would have an annual public meeting to share progress. As I think you both know, next Wednesday, we'll be having a public meeting to share the draft EAP, and then that'll be on the board agenda for the 18th. With your agreement, I would complete the strike-throughs here under educational equity audit, that it would be every 3 years in conjunction with the comprehensive planning process. And then that the EAP would be presented at least once every 3 years to the board in detail. Are there any questions about that section of the policy? Okay. And then below that, we talked about it including benchmarks and metrics to evaluate the progress towards the objectives of the plan. We have a draft report card that we're going to be sharing next Wednesday that has a tiered evaluation system, much like administrators receive exceeds, meets, and in need of progress. We have that type of a report card drafted and ready to go that would provide the benchmarks and the metrics. And then we have action steps in 4 different areas. So I think when that's made public, it will meet the objectives here of having very clear benchmarks and metrics. And then we also have a summary of the results of the district-wide audit available. So our EAP will include that summary. And that's also going to be presented next week for our first. And then we did say that the superintendent will annually provide the update at a public meeting. And we had added that it would be, it could be a board meeting or it could be an equitable practices meeting. So school board could decide on an annual basis where you would like that presentation. Any questions about that section? Any of those, that language?
None for me, looks good.
Okay, thanks, Carla and Sarah. And then we were leaving all of these underneath the kinds of things that could be included in the audit. We wanted to leave that wide open. So in not deleting or checking anything, what we're essentially saying is, depending on the areas of focus, it could include any or all of those topics. Look okay? I don't think we had any changes last meeting around that. And then under the guidelines, once again, we were accepting PSBA's language in these areas around pathways, equitable resources, a welcoming environment, partnerships, and that we're going to be using both quantitative and qualitative data. One of the things you'll see in the equity action plan is that we are looking at purchasing an online platform, which would offer at least annual, though we could do them more frequently than annually, at least annual surveys of all constituent groups in each of these areas. And then commitment to professional learning around cultural proficiency. Workforce diversity is a component of our equity action plan. And then again, the professional development section. So all of that is in place. Now, Zara, there was a phrasing that you wanted to make a change. And I wanted to make sure I know where exactly that is in the policy. You wanted to change other characteristics to sexual orientation. You wanted to be specific.
No. That wasn't my recommendation. I was just noticing that sexual orientation isn't defined, isn't explicitly named in the policy.
Okay.
And my question was, is that assumed under other characteristics, or is that something that we want to explicitly name the way that we've named gender and race and other things? So it was really more of a flag or a question. I was not suggesting it would replace that.
Oh, okay. Can you tell me where in the policy you're seeing? I see under student disaggregated data
Mm-hmm.
We don't always have that data for students.
I think it was in the general, let me bring it up on my screen so I can scroll through.
Yes.
Because I don't want to tell you to keep having to go up and down. I believe it was under, I mean, it's just sort of generally, so generally throughout the policy. So the question was, I noticed that throughout the policy, we list other things such as gender, race. And so a good example is under the authority.
Yes.
When we're listing gender, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and I don't want to make a huge list, and other characteristics sort of generally implies anything else. And so it was really just a question to other board members, but Carla's the only one here, about whether we wanted to be like name that specifically. And I think the thing I had brought up is that gender and sexuality are often compounded, and they're not, they're two different things. And so supporting transgender students on their gender identity is separate from sexual orientation.
I actually agree with Sarah that we should list it.
Okay. Where would you like it within that statement under authority? Would you like it after the word gender and before race? Would you like it in front of and other characteristics, or anywhere in particular?
I don't feel strongly about it.
It would just need to be probably after gender, sexual orientation, because so people know that that's different.
Okay, I will. Do you want me to add the word identity behind gender? Gender, do you want it to say gender identity, or are you comfortable with it saying just gender?
I think just gender. I don't know, what do you think, Carla?
I guess I would agree. I just felt like I guess my focus was the sexual orientation needs to be on there, but I think just gender is fine.
Okay. All right. Is there anything else that you wanted to change within the language or content? Anything that you feel is missing? Are you comfortable with the definitions? I will say, I do think this is a substantive positive step forward for the district. Much as when we had the equity vision statement, I think this will communicate the seriousness of the board in committing to ongoing work. All right.
Yeah.
It's okay, Sarah. Was there something you wanted to say?
Oh, no, I was just going to say, no, I think it looks great. And anything else I had was about how that equity then gets implemented in the context of other policies.
Yes. And so one of the things that when we get into the 100s in a few minutes, we have the option always with any policy of adding administrative regulations. And that's more the how the policy is implemented. And so if the board had specific concerns or questions about implementation, we can always add an administrative regulation, which does not, it can change without it being, it's not a board adoption, but it can be associated with a particular policy. And so we can talk about that once this is approved. We could look and see if there's anything specific, such as some of the things you mentioned to me around how we collect student data and how we house that data, et cetera. Okay. All right, so I'm going to return then to the agenda. Okay. And so with regard to the second review, assuming that we have the solicitor support 815 and 816 will move forward to the board for first reading on the 18th, and also 832 with the changes that have been identified. Okay. Okay. All right. And then agenda item 3 was, you may recall we had an executive session in December on public participation in board meetings. This was the result of some concern around what is and is not protected speech by members of the community in their 3-minute sessions, their comment period. And so I just wanted to update you that our solicitor is reviewing policy 903 as it currently exists for the district, and they are going to be making recommendations to us for changes as a result of the legal review coming through PSBA from a neighboring school district's lawsuit and the impact of that. So we had a presentation from Fox Rothschild at our executive session, and I just wanted to update you that we'll be providing an updated policy 903 at our next policy committee meeting based on that legal interpretation. Any questions about that or concerns? All right. And then lastly, the last agenda item is a biggie. So we have been going through this PSBA review. I know this looks like we're going to be meeting for the next 32 hours, but this is an easy one. All of these 100 level policies have been reviewed by both PSBA and Fox Rothschild. We are undergoing this entire school district year and into next summer if needed, where we're undergoing an evaluation at the state level that we requested of PSBA. We've actually contracted with them to review every one of our policies to see whether or not we're in line, we're in compliance with current legal guidance. And so we're getting 2 views. We have PSBA reviewing and we have Fox reviewing. All of these policies, and I'll go back now into the policies themselves. All of these policy drafts that you can see in board docs, you'll notice if you go into the policies that are listed, there are no substantive changes. So either you'll see a policy that doesn't have a single word in bold, or you will see one that may have, let me just scroll through, you may have one that includes a few words in bold. And so these policies, we're moving forward. I'm going to pick another one here for you, where they've asked us to add the word curriculum, and then they've added number 5. So Dr. Johnson and I have reviewed these policies that are on the agenda under item 4. And we believe that we can adopt these as recommended by PSBA and Fox as is. So they are existing policies with very minor changes. And so it's not every policy in the 100 level. There are a number of policies in the 100 level that are not listed under agenda item number 4 because we are taking some time to review them more closely. So as an example, you will not see this particular policy, non-discrimination of qualified students with disabilities, on our January 18th agenda, because this is all of that in bold are substantive changes to recommended policy. So this is going to be requiring much more careful and close scrutiny of our administrative team before we would bring it to the policy committee. So you will not see 103.1 in that long list on the agenda. Again, if I go back to meetings and agenda, we skipped over 103 because those policies we need more time to review those. So while we could in theory adopt what PSBA has recommended and just take all the bold language and say, yes, that sounds good, as an administrative team, we really feel like we need to take some more time to review. And so our hope is that by the end of this month, I put a tentative date for us at the end of January, all the remaining 100 level policies, our administrative team will have reviewed carefully, and then we will add in green any changes or strike throughs that we think are appropriate based on Springfield Township's unique circumstances. And so, but every policy that's listed here under public content for agenda item number 4, we're very comfortable advancing as is. And I realize that's a lot, and you could go through them one at a time. If you'll look, you'll see that it's essentially either grammatical changes, a change in 1 or 2 words that don't substantively change the purpose of the policy, or no changes at all. So essentially what PSBA is saying in those instances is the district's current policy is in keeping with expected guidelines. But if you have any questions at all about any of these policies, or you want to look at any of them closely, Dr. Johnson and I are here to answer any questions you have in that list.
Okay, I know we're all staring at the policy. Is it possible that you could just bring up one policy for me, the behavior policy? I just wanted to see what was contained in that. Do you mind?
113.2?
Yeah.
Okay. Bring that up to the top.
Thank you.
Of course. Tell me when you want me to scroll down, or you also have access to this within board docs, but I understand it might be easier to read on screen.
Thank you.
You got it.
And Dr. Yanka, just for process, to make sure I'm understanding correctly, you just need us to okay this to then go to the full board on the 18th, but we have time between now and the 18th to review this more in detail if we need. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah. All right, scroll up a little bit. Then if we have time, then thank you, Zara. Then I'm good. I just wanted to take a little bit more time to review, so I'm fine.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
And so, you know, I mean, what the board motion would say is that the board adopts the following policies, one motion, we wouldn't do individual motions for every one of these policies, because this is a comprehensive review by PSBA. And so we're going to have clusters of policies. And if we waited and did one at a time, it would take us years to get through them. So in some cases, as we read it, and so Dr. Johnson is here, you know, she was previously the Director of Student Services and Special Education. And so she has reviewed this policy, for example, in detail to make sure that our practices as a district conform to what PSBA is recommending should be the policy and practices of the district.
Okay.
So as an example here under authority, you'll see that we try positive behavior interventions first, right? And de-escalation techniques, and that more stringent behavior is a last resort. I believe they actually use the word a last resort. The use of restraint shall be considered a measure of last resort. And so we make sure that we're in compliance. And then again, Fox Rothschild will review these same policies and say to us, yes, this is what your policy should be based on current legal guidance.
Dr. Yannicka,
Oh, hello, Dr.
does PSBA put out a specific framework or specific guidelines so that districts can match up their policies according to their framework? Is there like something, a specific document we could go to?
This is the document, yes. So what PSBA is doing is, when you're in board docs, what you are receiving from PSBA is their current language. And then what we ask our solicitor to do, Fox Rothschild, is take a second look. Is there anything you see that is unique to Springfield Township that warrants any kind of tweaking of language, any additions or deletions that would be legally advisable? And then we bring it to you. That's one of the advantages of board docs, because in the past, prior to board docs, we had our own font and format, I'll say, for each policy, and then we would update them. I mean, years ago, it was in Microsoft Word. Okay, and so now that we adopted board docs this summer, we're in a situation where the language is coming directly from the policy manual of PSBA, and then we are modifying and adjusting anything that is unique for us. But, and there was a question earlier that I think is important for all the members of the board to hear, and that is that the recommendation for policy, which, and I'll actually show you this at the end, because this is a great crib sheet for you. So if you go down at the very bottom, when you go into board docs to where it says cross-reference, so if you select that and you start at the very top, you'll see that there are notes for board members.
Okay.
And the second note I'll point out, in developing draft policies, note that the language is crafted with an emphasis on providing a clearly structured policy in a format that is easily understandable to all stakeholders and focuses on what is required to comply with state and federal laws and regulations. The details regarding how the administration is going to move forward with achieving the goals of the policy should be stated in separate district procedures or administrative regulations. So, Sarah, for example, the question you asked around the educational equity policy, that is something that would come into an administrative regulation that following the adoption of the policy, we could begin to craft. Or for example, under behavior, Carla, we could say, in the school district of Springfield Township, we are currently using responsive classroom at the elementary level and restorative discipline practices at the secondary level in order to meet the expectations of policy 113.1. So we can do that. We don't have a lot. If you look on our website under policy, we don't have a ton of administrative regulations, but we do have some. And then this crib sheet is, I think, wonderful that PSBA does this for us. So what they're telling you is, here's the policy, here's any deletions or notes, and any new language. So for every policy, if you don't want to go through the policy and have to review it with a fine tooth comb, you can come here to the crib sheet and see exactly what they're recommending. Or if they're recommending to delete a policy, for example. So I find this to be the most helpful. And certainly I think worth your time. So as an example, if I take a look at 104.2, you can see there in their notes, the policy was converted into board docs with language as is and minor formatting edits as it was written by the district solicitor. So essentially what PSBA is saying is you're good to go. And that's why we would add it to the board agenda as it is. But there are some policies that Dr. Johnson and I just want more time. For example, 146.1, the trauma-informed approach, and Title I comparability of services, because they're new. So we want some extra time to review those before we bring them forward to you. I hope that's helpful to you. Okay, so I'm going to go back into the agenda. So if there are any changes that you would like us to make, as you see what's there, or you see a word missing, for example, SAR's recommendation that we add sexual orientation to the educational equity policy, we can do that. We have the license as a district to make modifications to the PSBA recommendations. Typically, what I would do is if it was anything other than a word or two, if we thought it was substantive, then I would share it with Fox Rothschild and ask them to affirm that they don't see any difficulty for us from a legal perspective in making those changes. Are there any other policies you wanted to take a closer look at?
Now with your sharing sort of the summaries, for lack of a better word, and having some time, I'm fine not going through any more policies.
Okay,
as they
yeah,
stand.
that cross-reference is really helpful, I think. But I do understand, look, there's a lot here. And I will say, I understand that it can be daunting. This is a challenging, this is sort of the core of what the board does, is establish policy. So I do understand the need for some careful scrutiny. And if you want us to wait until the next board meeting, February 1st, instead of January 18th, we can do that if you would like more time. So if you start to look at these and say, I do really have some questions, I'd like to bring these back to the next policy committee meeting, that's fine. Because I do understand that we have more regular exposure to policy implementation than you may have. And so if you need the time, it's not a problem at all for us. Okay, the policies that we've brought forward earlier were more urgent policies. For example, the 201 we brought last month, because we wanted to make a decision about the entrance age of children prior to kindergarten enrollment this year. So there are none of these policies that are listed under agenda item 4 that are urgent for us right now. So if you want more time, it's fine. Okay. I don't think we have anybody from the public in attendance. Mr. Wexler, can you confirm that for me?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. And so the only other item we had was to ask, we had talked about alternating AM and PM times for these meetings. Dr. Johnson and I are at your disposal. So if you prefer afternoon, that's fine. If you prefer morning, that's fine. Thinking that we were alternating, I put it at 8 o'clock a few weeks from now, at the end of the month, on Thursday, the 27th. Is that a date and time that works, or would you prefer an afternoon?
Dr. Yannicone, I will not be in the district on the 27th.
Understood. So we may want to move that because some of these policies are directly impacting areas of program in your wheelhouse.
And I'm not available on the 27th in the morning. I have a doctor situation with my parent on that particular day.
Okay.
Usually the mornings are great, but on that one particular date is not.
Okay. Dr. Etlin, how about mornings for you?
Mornings for me are fine. So, it's good. It's
Okay.
good. 8 o'clock is a great time.
Okay. And Sarah, how about you?
My schedule is very different from day to day, so I can make it work. What's more imperative for me is as much notice as possible. So whatever what works best for the group, as soon as we can lock that in, I can block that off at work.
Okay. So how about if Dr. Johnson and I send a few options for a morning meeting at the end of January, and then you can confirm for us over email whether or not that works. And then we can announce that day and time at the January 18th board meeting. Because typically we do announce the public meeting at public meetings in advance when the next policy committee meeting would be. Okay. And then unless I hear otherwise from you, we will forward those agenda items, the policy 15, 16, and 32, along with the others from agenda item 1 for the first reading on the 18th, as well as a single motion to adopt a group of 100 level policies as recommended by PSBA. Okay. But if in the interim, there's anything that you want us to hold off on, any individual policy, you say, can we pull that off and talk about it at the end of the month? It's no problem. Okay, whatever you're comfortable with. All right, we'll really be getting into the meat of it when we hit the 200s. That's student life, and I will tell you, right now, those are the policies that cause the most, result in the most conversation. Okay, because 200 level policies are directly impacting the life of students day to day.
I just wanted to clarify, morning meetings are very good for me, just on the 27th. I might be on, but I'll be on by phone because I have to do transport. So that's the only issue. I prefer morning meetings.
Okay, understood,
Yeah.
understood. And Dr. Etlin, I think I heard you say the 27th is not good for you.
No, 27th is good for me.
Oh, it is good for you.
It's
Okay,
good.
Sarah?
Mhm.
Okay, the only challenge we have actually is Dr. Johnson, because several of these policies, I would love for her ability to be there for you. So I'm gonna look at a couple of other dates, not the 27th.
Any other morning that week, Dr. Yannicone works for both you and I, so unless there's if there's a conflict that we know by our committee members, any other morning that week should work.
Okay. Do you have a
Monday,
preference for another meeting that week?
Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, anyone? Doesn't matter, Carol.
Okay, maybe we'll stick with Wednesday then, because often we have cabinet meetings on Monday mornings. Okay. All right. Are there any other questions or concerns or policies that you wanted us to begin to pay some attention to in advance of the next meeting beyond the rest of the 100s? Our intention is to bring you the rest of the 100s at the end of the month. But if there are any other policies that you feel are urgent, you can either send us an email and say, please take a look at these. We'd like to discuss them at the next meeting, or any other questions you have related to the existing policies. Okay. All right. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. Oh, and one of you is going to be presenting a summary of this meeting at the board meeting on the 18th. You can draw straws or decide which one. Okay. We'll check in with you next week and see who feels comfortable doing that. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great night.
Have a good evening.
Be well, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.
See you.